Just imagine this. A man's kidnapped and is taken to a secret location, and then against his will, he's subjected to all sorts of sex change procedures, and he eventually escapes. He goes back to his family. When his kids see him, they say, "Oh, hello, Dad. Really glad you're back." Would anyone really say, "No, no, kids, this is not Dad anymore. You've now got another mum"? Okay, when his wife said, "Oh, it's fantastic, my husband's been released," would you say, "No, no, no, not husband anymore. That person is now your wife"? And when the man himself said, "Look, I'm a man, I'm still a man," would anyone say, "No, you're not anymore. You've had sex change operations. You're now a woman"? And no one would say those things. That demonstrates that we don't actually really believe that these procedures result in someone changing sex. Sex is biological reality. It's impossible to change sex whether you want to or not. Now, even sort of queer theory advocates believe that underneath. They think that sex is biological, and then gender is either a social construct or it's subjective self-concept or whatever. I won't try and clarify that because what they believe doesn't make sense. So when we're looking at the Gender Recognition Act that the Scottish Government's been considering, it's not really a Gender Recognition Act. It's a Sex Recognition Act, because what's what goes on your passport, medical records, etc. It's sex. Now, in the past, the line on the form might have said gender, but that was back in the good old days when sex and gender meant exactly the same thing. So what the Scottish Government's really considering is a Sex Recognition Act. Now, since 2004, it's been possible in the UK to change sex officially. And once someone's changed sex officially, if you like, the rest of society has to comply with that. They have to play along, treat them as their new alleged sex. Now, if you remember back to 2004, was there a great debate on this? No, not really. And part of the reason for that is there was no point having a debate on it, because the European Court of Human Rights told the UK that they had to introduce this law, which is an example of a supranational body overruling the democratic will of a nation. So in 2004, a key principle was conceded, and that is that you can change sex officially. And that resulted in all sorts of problems. You have people of the wrong sex going into private spaces reserved for the other sex. We've already seen that problem coming out. We have like men competing in women's sports. We've already seen that being a problem. We have the problem of compelled speech. There have already been stories where people have either refused to refer to someone as a man or a woman because they believe that they're not, things like that. A story from a school in Scotland, a couple of 12-year-olds, one of them bullied the other apparently, then the bully changed gender, and the 12-year-old who'd been bullied said, "Well, I'm not going to call you by your new name or whatever." So what happened? The police were called into the school to speak to the 12-year-old. So compelled speech already a problem. And the more serious problem, I think maybe this is the biggest problem, this is the one that doesn't get spoken about so much, is that if the concept of changing sex is endorsed nationally, that presents to people who are suffering with gender dysphoria an option. It puts light at the end of the tunnel and says, here's an avenue you can go down to solve your problem. You can aim to transition, then everything will be okay. So from school upwards in society, this option is presented as normal, natural, healthy, easy road to go down. And we're already seeing the results of that, a massive increase in the number of young people in particular going down this road. Now, in 2004, when this was all introduced, when the principle was conceded, there wasn't a huge fuss. But now the new Gender Recognition Acts have been brought in, there's been a lot of opposition. So what's the change? The new Gender Recognition Act proposed in Scotland takes away the requirement that someone, for example, lives 2 years as a woman. I mean, how you live as a woman, I don't know how they check that. But that condition would go. No medical diagnosis would be required anymore, and people would be able to change gender at 16 instead of 18. So the Gender Recognition Act makes things worse. Okay, so it is a bad thing. But the wave of protest, the campaigning groups that have been formed, feminists up in arms have become a really hot issue. What arguments do they use? They say biology is real. A man can't become a woman. But these are not arguments against self-identification. These are not arguments against the Gender Recognition Act 2020 version. These are arguments against any sort of gender recognition system. Really, these protests are 16 years too late. This should have been going on in 2004 when the key principle was conceded. So as the Scottish Family Party, we're proposing a new policy. We're saying the change in sex should not be an option. It goes on your birth certificate and that's it from then on. No changes are possible. Now, the one exception we would be willing to consider would be for people with biological intersex conditions. Okay, so we could possibly have exceptions there, but apart from that, what's on your birth certificate stays there. And then throughout your life, any organization can ask you what your sex is. If they don't want to do that, if they want to ask you about what your gender identity is that day or whatever and give you 65 options, well, that's fine, that's up to them. But a person's sex is male or female throughout their life, and it's not changing. Now, of course, some people will try to say, oh, that's very cruel, but it's not at all. People who experience gender identity disorder deserve our sympathy, of course, but the question is, what's the best way forward? The best way forward is to align self-perception with reality rather than trying to align reality with self-perception. Now, even if there are a tiny number of cases where going through and changing gender, living as a man instead of a woman or whatever, that is actually the best option for them. I'm not sure it ever is, but even if it is, the fact that this gets endorsement nationally results in huge harm to a lot of other people, particularly children who are led down the same road unnecessarily. Now, a similar law was introduced in Hungary quite recently, and we will be taking a vote on this policy at the Scottish Family Party Conference on Saturday, the 14th of November. So why don't you join us? It's going to be online. We're going to have speakers and sessions, votes, etc. in the morning, optional sessions in the afternoon, and then a short run of speakers in the evening as well. The conference is open to non-members, but if you'd like to vote, you'll need to join the Scottish Family Party, which you can do right now via the link below. Thanks for watching.